afternoon to all the dignitaries and the enthusiastic participants. On behalf of the Department of English of HSNC Board, Srimati CHM College, Ulhasnagar, Government's VYT Postgraduate College Autonomous, Durg, Chhattisgarh, and the KET's VG Vaze College of Arts, Science and Commerce Autonomous, Mumbai, I, Mrs. Vrushali Kaneri, welcome you all for the second day of the two-day national level workshop on research methods in English studies, language and literature. I'm sure you all will agree with me that yesterday's both the sessions were extremely beneficial. To enhance our knowledge and to enlighten us on the path of research, we have amongst us an eminent scholar. It gives me immense pleasure in introducing our today's speaker for the first session, Dr. Lakshmi Muthukumar. Dr. Lakshmi Muthukumar heads the Department of English at the South Indian Education Society's College of Arts, Science and Commerce, Sion West, Mumbai. She has been teaching undergraduate students language and literature for more than 25 years now. She also teaches postgraduate students as a visiting faculty and is a registered guide for PhD in English. Her areas of interest include language studies, gender studies, and creative writing. Her doctoral work was on the topic Negotiating the Private and Public Spheres, a feminist exploration of the gendered spheres and identity struggles in the place of Wendy Wasserstein. She is a member of several syllabus design committees for autonomous institutes across Mumbai and is also a member of Syllabus Design Committee for the Master's Program in English Literature and Cultural Studies at the University of Mumbai. She has published over 30 research papers in various national and international journals. Thank you very much, ma'am, for accepting our invitation to be a resource person. We all are ready for continuing this beautiful journey towards understanding research culture. Thank you so much. Over to you, Lakshmi, ma'am.
Thank you so much for your generous introduction, Vrushali.
Thank you, ma'am.
Just tell me if my screen is visible, yeah?
Yes, ma'am, your screen is visible.
Yes?
Yes, ma'am, it is visible.
Wonderful. At the very outset, let me place on record my thanks to the managements of the VYT Autonomous Government College, Durg, the CHM College, and Vaze College, Mulund, for this opportunity to interact with you all research scholars. Thank you very much. A very good afternoon to one and all here, especially to my friends, Dr. Dinesh Nair, Dr. Pratima Das, and Dr. Somali Gupta, whom I haven't met in person, but we have definitely interacted virtually a couple of times during the pandemic. As Dr. Somali Gupta had mentioned in her concept note yesterday, in any kind of research, it's the journey. Excuse me, I think there's some kind of disturbance. Thank you. As Dr. Somali Gupta had mentioned in her concept note yesterday, in any kind of research, it's the journey that is truly enjoyable, more than the destination itself. Every minor research project, every major research project, every dissertation is just another milestone. We need to keep updating and reinventing ourselves in order to stay relevant. Yesterday, I was also made aware of the fact that some of the participants of this workshop on research methodology are, in fact, undergraduate students, and I'm extremely glad that autonomous colleges are, in fact, encouraging undergraduate students to get themselves acquainted with various theoretical perspectives that can be used in order to analyze literature? Well, yesterday you must have attended Dr. Sunila Pillai's session on social linguistics, and you must have also attended Dr. Anusha Ramanathan's session on mixed methods. Both of them were very, very insightful sessions, and they have done some groundwork already for me. Hoping that I don't repeat anything that they have already said, I propose to, in my session, focus on debunking some myths that surround research, and also share some of the things I have learned in my journey so far through my experiences in research. I wish to somewhere argue that it is an ongoing process. It's not something that you stop once you reach a milestone. As I just mentioned, whether it's a proposal that you're going to first, frame, or it is your second or third research project, or it's just an essay that you're working on, or trying to publish an article, I am going to be building a case for academic rigor and sincerity and respecting the intellectual property rights of all those whose ideas and whose words all of you will be using in the course of this journey. That is of utmost importance. While having said that, whenever one registers for a PhD, it is the pot of gold at the end of the rainbow that you covet the most, that very attractive abbreviation, capital D followed by an R dot, right? That is our goal when we register for a PhD. But I just want to bring home certain facts and debunk some myths that surround the word research, so that all of you, as and when you do undertake this journey, actually realize research, actually enjoy it as a process, and don't just do it because someone is suggesting that it is a qualification that is necessary for you to be appointed somewhere. And you don't just do it because someone is stressing you that your time is ticking and you want to do it. And don't jump into something and sign up for something without understanding, without completely becoming aware of what you are getting into. Let us look at what the most common myth, the one common myth I'm going to take up today, and then talk about ways of realizing research efficiently. Okay, that is going to be the focus of my talk. So this is one common myth. I hope my slide is visible and that I'm audible to all of you.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes. So this is a quote from Wilson Misner, which is a myth that I think is worth exploring. It says, if you steal from one author, it's plagiarism. If you steal from many, it's research. Now, I have really, looked at quite a few research scholars' work. Generally, what I've noticed is that mediocrity is fast becoming the order of the day. I want to therefore sound a note of caution to anyone who is embarking on research that you need to first of all recognize that this is not what research is. Let's do a reality check on what exactly your guide who is allotted to you or who you sign up to do research under, or what the subject experts who will finally be evaluating your dissertation, what are they looking for? they are going to focus on how relevant your research is. They are going to focus on why your research is publication worthy. They're going to ask this question of the dissertation that you have submitted, and they are going to answer these questions in their evaluation report. There is also going to be, now at least in Mumbai, it is a practice in the University of Mumbai, that a plagiarism report be attached along with the thesis and be bound and submitted along with the thesis, which vouchsafes for the fact that this is an original piece of work and it is a contribution worthy of being published, and therefore this candidate is found eligible for a viva and then of course eligible for conferring the title of the doctoral degree. Having said that, it is extremely necessary to revisit what you understand by research. And since there are some undergraduate students here, I think it is important to look at some basic definitions of research before I share my own experiences with you and some tips on how you can do research efficiently. According to Clifford Woody, he says research comprises defining and redefining problems, formulating hypotheses or suggested solutions, collecting, organizing and evaluating data, making deductions and reaching conclusions, and at last carefully testing the conclusions to determine whether they fit the formulating hypothesis. Now let us see how this is relevant to literature. In literature, there are endless possibilities for research. Why is that? Because literature happens to be one of the most interdisciplinary of all subjects. When we do literature, we automatically do history. When we do literature, we automatically study psychology. When we enjoy a literary work, we automatically enjoy a sociological approach to it, an anthropological approach to culture. So there are perspectives as varied as cultural studies, feminist studies, gender studies, masculinity studies, queer theory, postmodernist studies, posthumanist studies, trauma theory, fashion studies, you name it. There is an endless line of perspectives which you can use to see literature through the lens of, to study literature through the lens of. And there are myriad research problems that you can think of. However, I want to tell you that it is necessary to let an idea simmer in your head for a while, mature for a while, do a lot of reading till you arrive at some kind of a problem or a hypothesis. It is always better to read your primary sources carefully, identify an area that you like working in or are excited about, and when you actually register for a piece of research, see if that idea is still current, because things are changing so fast that out there in the West, things have already moved ahead and we are still talking about trends which have long become passé. We should genuinely look for adding new dimensions to research that is in existence, which are definitely possible if you think of comparative studies, comparative literature, people who have the ability to read regional works in Indian languages, Bhasha literatures, who are able to translate people who are able to read translated fiction or plays, poetry, and who keep themselves up to date with what's happening on the literary scene, need to sincerely take up this approach in order to look at not just Western aesthetic notions, but also look towards how a new dimension can be added to problematize, maybe not always to answer questions, not always to seek solutions, but sometimes also to question. Now, let us look at some more keywords from D. Steiner and M. Stephenson's definition of research. Some of the keywords from their definition that I've taken up to share here are that research involves the manipulation of things, concepts, or symbols for the purpose of generalization, to sometimes extend knowledge, to sometimes correct knowledge, to sometimes verify whether that knowledge aids in construction of theory or in the practice of an art. This is extremely relevant for research in literature, conceptual research in literature, methodological research in literature, and of course, theoretical interventions which we can make. This is an important realization which all of us need to have very early on in our journey. I cannot stress on the importance of relevance and academic rigor enough, even as I talk about the tremendous scope for research in English literature. One has to constantly interrogate whether the topic one has taken up for research is trying to add another dimension to or add to the existing scholarship on a particular writer's oeuvre or on a selected number of that writer's works. How is your work adding another dimension to existing scholarship? In what way is your research contributing to this? How is your research adding to existing theoretical interventions? Now, just to give you an example here, some time ago we had invited in our college Dr. Pramod Nair, of course virtually, to talk about cultural trauma. And he spoke about this idea of eco-precarity. And this is his theoretical addition to theoretical interventions that are existing already in the field of trauma studies. And let me tell you, that is what is the need of the hour. Somehow, I notice amongst youngsters today that there is a myth, a mistaken notion that research is nothing but a patchwork quilt. You take a little bit from here, a little bit from there, you amalgamate it all, stitch it all up together, and palm it off as your research project. Please understand, a few years down the line, one will look back at this initial foray into research and look at it with embarrassment. Is this what I started out with? It's happened to me too. I'm sharing something that I have also experienced. One is doing something original without having taken the necessary steps to read up on all the existing work on the issue, on the topic. Literature review is so important. And I think you are all privileged today, living as you do, in an era which has witnessed, I think, a maximum, optimum kind of a digital revolution with everything at the tips of your fingers. I'm sure Dr. Dinesh Nair, Dr. Somali Gupta, Dr. Pratima Das, Dr. Sudhila Pillai, Dr. Anusha Ramanathan will all agree with me. There were days when we used to go to the Fort campus, to Kalina campus, to actually pore over physical, dusty copies of people's dissertations. That is how we used to function. But today, you can, from the convenience of your homes, log into something like ProQuest and look at dissertations from all over the world. You know exactly how much work has been done. If you log into Shodh Ganga or Shodh Gangotri, you have all this available to you at the click of a mouse. So that you don't really have any excuse not to do your literature review, not to practice academic rigor sincerely, ethically, and it is vital that we do this before we take on a topic. It would be ideal if your work adds on a new theoretical paradigm or a critical tool to the existing arsenal of critical perspectives on literature. That would be ideal. Even if that is not possible, you can always add another dimension or add another critical perspective to existing scholarship in one author's work or one dramatist's work. Another area that research scholars can take up very seriously is undertaking a chronological assessment or survey of, let's say, you want to look at crime fiction that has been published in India, in English as well as in translation from other regional languages, from post-independence times to the present. You see how vast that topic is. This topic can be further narrowed if you decide to look only at, let's say, psychological thrillers. Further narrow it by looking at psychological thrillers written by women writers. Further narrow it by looking at psychological thrillers written by women novelists who have published their work only in the first decade of the 21st century. So what have you just done? You've narrowed down the scope of your work to include or focus on just crime fiction, within crime fiction, psychological crime thrillers, and here only on women writers writing in the first decade of the 21st century. Narrowing down your scope further makes your research specialized, unique, like a niche area. And then you will find that you have to procure all your primary texts and decide what are the critical tools you are going to need. In which domain are you going to locate such a research project? Are you going to locate it in the domain of culture studies? Are you going to locate it as popular culture? Are you going to work on popular romances? What is it that you are going to use as your lens, as your theoretical tools? This is again extremely important. How is it relevant to this time that we live in? Do novels of crime present maps of criminality that reveal things about the changing nature of the human psyche? Can be a research question. You can take up this question in the context of, has the digital revolution and the pandemic in certain ways changed the way or the manner in which crimes are committed? Let us say you don't look at corporate crime, you don't look at psychological thrillers, you look at corporate crime, novels that deal with corporate crime. And you look at not just women writers. So I hope you're with me on this and you are able to understand just how much scope there is in just one area. If you want to chronologically study every writer, it will become the subject matter worthy of an entire book. Right? N.K. Nayak once wrote a history of English literature, major Indian English literature. Right? Major work, which was, I think, quite a seminal work, which almost became like a reference book on Indian English writing. If you want to attempt one such survey, you can decide what is it that you want to work on. But you will have to procure all your primary sources and read them. Before you decide, I want to sign up for this. Before you decide, this is what I want to live with for the next 5 to 6 years. Because believe me, if it is something that you are going to get bored with in a year or two, that boredom will reflect in your writing. That boredom will seep into your work. That lack of enthusiasm will resonate in the way in which you write your thesis. Therefore, choose wisely, choose carefully. Do not choose a topic because someone is suggesting it. Always think about how relevant it is to this time that we live in. Is it a theoretical intervention that you believe in? Is it something that you are convinced about? And if you are, read all your primary sources, procure all your secondary sources, manage all your sources, and gather all your resources together very systematically before you embark on this journey. Let me briefly dwell on some useful perspectives on research. If one were to just summarize what research is in a nutshell, research is always looked at as an original contribution to the existing stock of knowledge that makes for its advancement, that somewhere advances the study in that area, in that domain, then whether it is post-colonialism or post-modernism, or it is queer studies or trauma studies, or speciesism, or masculinity studies, or disability studies, there are domains aplenty, theoretical perspectives aplenty. And if you choose to, there is no limit to what you can do. But you must be very clear as to what is the contribution you are making to this area before you embark on it. As such, the term research refers to a systematic method consisting of step by step enunciating the problem, formulating a hypothesis, collecting the facts or data, analyzing the facts, and reaching certain conclusions, either in the form of solutions towards the concerned problem or in certain generalizations for some theoretical formulation. This is, of course, a very basic perspective on research. What is the basic purpose of research? Academicians and theorists are in agreement over the fact that the purpose of research is to discover answers to questions through the application of scientific procedures. Now, can procedures be scientific in literature? The main aim of literature, research in literature, is to find out the truth which is hidden, which is not obvious to others, which you are trying to discover, which has not been discovered yet. There might not be something radically new, but even if it is a theoretical intervention that you are making, which adds another dimension that problematizes existing scholarship in that area, it still becomes a valuable intervention. You have to believe in that truth in order to convince others. And you have to do all the necessary reading and referencing in order to arrive at that degree of expertise which is necessary to put down that idea or thought systematically, sincerely, with academic rigor, practiced every step of the way. What are the objectives of research? The very first objective is to gain familiarity with the phenomenon or to achieve new insights into it. And therefore, almost every research, every dissertation has as its first chapter the critical tools, the theoretical perspectives which you are going to use in the course of your study. So, are you going to use gender studies? If you are, what are the perspectives you are going to adopt? Are you going to use Marxist criticism? If so, which theorists are you going to draw upon? Are these theorists still relevant? Is your research dated? Is your literature review up to date? This is extremely important in all exploratory research studies. In order to accurately portray the characteristics of a particular situation or a group or genre, studies with this objective in view are known as descriptive research studies, which is the most common research area in literature. Sometimes the frequency with which something occurs or with which it is associated is determined by certain diagnostic research studies. For example, one could say, is it that because of the digital revolution post the pandemic, digital updation post the pandemic, psychological thrillers and corporate crime fiction has increased in the market? Now, this could be a possible topic that you take up, and you try to justify this with your research. You try to test whether your hypothesis is right. You might have to blend both quantitative and qualitative methods to do this. To test a hypothesis of a causal relationship between variables. This is also known as hypothesis testing research studies. There are several types of research, and I will be briefly touching upon each one of these. The first one I will be looking at is descriptive versus analytical research. The second one I will look at is applied versus fundamental research. The third one is qualitative versus quantitative research. And finally, conceptual versus empirical research. And in the last part of my presentation, I will be sharing with you some tips on how you can methodically approach your research. First, let me talk about descriptive versus analytical research. Descriptive research generally concentrates on finding facts to ascertain the nature of something as it exists. So you take up a particular writer's work and you describe how this writer's work may be analyzed from a fresh perspective, where you add another dimension, another theoretical tool never before employed to look at this writer's work. If your work is an also ran, it is already dated. If your work has already been done, attempted by someone else, then it is a repetition. It is not something new or novel. Therefore, reconsider before you embark on such a beaten track. In contrast, analytical research is concerned with determining the validity of a hypothesis based on an analysis of facts collected. Yesterday, Dr. Anusha Ramanathan was talking about mixed methods. That is also possible. For example, you can take up how teaching a particular text sensitizes students towards gender issues. You can have two control groups, one which has been taught gender sensitive texts and another which has not, and compare your findings. So it can be a marriage of both analysis of literary texts and the pedagogical relevance of imparting such education, prescribing such texts to school children perhaps, or to college going children perhaps. Very interesting mix of techniques. Applied versus fundamental research. Applied research is usually carried out to find answers to practical problems to be solved, and as an aid in decision making in different areas that could include product design, process design, and policy making. There's a lot that we can do as teachers of language and literature if we dwell on what is it, for example, that is ailing the English classroom today. Just take that as a research topic. What is it that is ailing the literature classroom today? What can be done to actually make it more dynamic, more relevant, more empowering? How can better textbooks be designed? How can better processes of imparting education through better educator training and better language policies at the level of the state, at the level of the center? The possibilities are endless. Fundamental research, on the other hand, is carried out more to satisfy intellectual curiosity than with the intention of using the research findings for any immediate practical application. Let us now look at qualitative versus quantitative research. Qualitative research studies aspects of the research subject which are not quantifiable and hence not subject to measurement and quantitative analysis. In contrast, quantitative research makes substantial use of measurements and quantitative analysis techniques. So let us say you are working on a particular kind of poetry. Let's say you're working on haiku or haiku, and you want to explore how teaching these forms, these genres in the English classroom is a feasible way to introduce the idea of the image or the symbol to a primary or a secondary level classroom. Now this would make for an interesting experiment. And you can blend both qualitative and quantitative techniques. You can have a questionnaire, you can run it across schools, different boards, CBSE, ICSE, state board, international boards, and you can compare results. You can have different groups. You can work on how particular kinds of literature lends itself in the classroom, and why certain other poems don't lend itself to the classroom situation. What are the practical constraints? For example, in syllabus design, there are endless possibilities. But having realized that there is so much scope in literature, one needs to be aware that conceptual research is what is really required. Empirical research I would want you to question whether empirical research in literature is really valid. Because when we take samples, we need to question whose reality these samples really respect. Are these samples truly inclusive? Have we done a balanced kind of a sampling which represents every segment of the population? Conceptual research therefore involves the investigation of thoughts and ideas and developing new ideas or interpreting the old ones based on logical reasoning. In contrast, empirical research is based on firm, verifiable data collected by either observation of facts under natural conditions or obtained through experimentation. Having completed my overview of the different types of research, I would request all the research scholars attending this workshop to ensure that you gather your resources carefully. And when you are gathering your resources, please be conscious of what word processors and other researching tools are available to you. I want to just briefly mention that Microsoft Word 2016 has a very nice researcher button under references, which you can use to gather all your resources. Also, there are several digital resources to choose from, both open resources as well as some resources you can subscribe to. You have InflipNet, you have JSTOR. I think even Dr. Ramanathan has listed all of these out. I don't need to repeat. You have several digital resources to choose from. In addition to these resources, you should also consider YouTube videos. These days, there are YouTube channels for almost every research scholar. If you look up Robert Talley has his own YouTube channel. Every lecture he has given in the pandemic is uploaded there. Listen to those lectures. The world has become a very small place today. Perhaps some of you work best when you listen to lectures and take your own notes and simultaneously read alongside. Do not fail to use these tools. Some of us work better when we listen. Some of us work better when we read. Some of us work very efficiently when we read and jot down what we understand simultaneously. This is a very interesting active way of reading and an active way of listening. When you do that, it helps to somewhere keep your mind tethered to the topic under consideration. You don't let your mind wander when you are actively summarizing what you have understood in your own words and jotting things down. I'm only sharing this as an important tip because researchers very often feel that this is a mountain they have to climb and it's an insurmountable mountain. It's not. It's just another deadline that you set yourself. If you have met every other deadline in your life, you will probably meet this one too. But you have to discipline yourself. That you have to set aside some part of the day for this activity when you and your biological clock is at its most efficient, when you are fresh, mentally. You have to decide whether you work well with reading a text or you work better with listening to someone read it aloud for you. Today there are LibriVox recordings of almost every literary work, classical work. So you can look at the classics, you can listen to them if you are tired of reading. You can do that. There is so much variety possible. There are MOOCs available. There are courses on Coursera available. Courses on NPTEL, Swayam available. You name it, and the resources available to you, made available to you. Tell me, and I would like to ask some of the undergraduate students from various autonomous institutes participating across the nation, has your library made digital resources available to you? If so, what are the resources you are able to access from your library as members of your library? Are you able to hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, that was a question for the students and the research scholars here. Just tell me, Vishali, what I'm supposed to click if I have to see hand raises. Or
Ma'am,
chat.
the reactions will be there, and in chat also the students can respond.
So the grid video, what am I supposed to click? Tanvi? Ah, that's better. All right. Yes. What are the digital e-resources you are able to access from your college library? EBSCO host. Great. Any others? Thank you, Geeta. JSTOR. Wonderful. Any others? Academia. That's great. Thank you, Madhubala. Okay, so there is no end to the digital e-resources available, and you should vary your sources because there are so many e-resources available, articles available, blogs available, magazines which might have something related to your topic. You might look for YouTube videos or other databases. You might even look at, as I said before, literature review through ProQuest. And once you find your resources, you need to evaluate your resources. And what are the questions that you will ask to evaluate your resources? It is necessary to choose academically rigorous sources. To ask yourself, who is the author of this article? Why should I believe what he or she has to say on the topic? Is the author an expert on the topic? How do you know whether he is an expert? How current is the information that is published in this source? When was this source published? Is this information out of date? All these questions have to be asked when you evaluate your sources before you use these as your secondary sources. Accuracy is another very important area. Is this information accurate? Is it presented objectively? Do the writers share the pros and cons in their article? After consulting all these varieties of sources, you need to also narrow down your topic. For example, popular culture as an area of research is huge. You would narrow down your topic to focus on just maybe novels of a particular variety located within just that particular time frame. What topics of research interest you more, will interest your audience more? What will be more engaging for the audience? You have to choose something that you will be able to dedicate the next 4 or 5 years of your life to without feeling as if it is a burden you have taken on your shoulders. Yeah, that is very important. So choose wisely. Once you have not narrowed down your topic, you have to, very important to narrow down your topic, because you're not trying to solve all the world's problems in your dissertation. It is necessary to indulge in some pre-writing to find out what exactly is going on in your head. Map your mind with pre-writing activities. Plan and outline what it is, the chapter scheme that you plan. How are you going to approach the second, third, and the fourth chapter? Write a first draft. Open a folder for your dissertation and open separate folders for chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And every time you come upon a secondary source, cite it and ensure you make a note of the date on which you've accessed it and keep storing it in the concerned folder. If people have told you that you should only read and not write, I would suggest from practical experience do both simultaneously. Because it is necessary to pin your thoughts down and pen them down, write them down as and when they assail you. And this might happen when you're traveling, when you're cooking, when you're moving, because this is something you are obsessing about. This is something that is always working in your head. It is never clear when an idea will strike you. So please do jot things down in the relevance folder as and when ideas strike you. Narrowing down your topic, redrafting and revising your work, editing and proofreading it today, it's so much easier with word processors at your disposal to do, right? Organize your research. If you look at this cluttered desktop, what kind of an impression does it present? So, we are in an era of information explosion. Organize your research. This is extremely helpful, not just for literary studies, because it will aid also in you arriving at your preferred structure. If you are systematic and organized and don't clutter your, the way in which you store your research work. I'm going to quickly conclude. How much time do I have left, Tanvi?
Ma'am, you can wind up in 5 minutes.
5 minutes, yes, will. Take every opportunity to present your research. Talking about your interest and research always helps. And when you do, you get feedback from your audience, and that helps immensely. So take every opportunity to at least make oblique presentations which are obliquely connected with your area of interest. It will help. I have a very quick quiz. Please unmute and answer, or you can put your answer on the chat box. If there is a research project that is titled Projecting Culture Through Literary Exportation, How Imitation in Scandinavian Crime Fiction Reveals Regional Mores. What is this a type of? Is it a descriptive, analytical, quantitative research, or an empirical piece of research? Anyone? Absolutely right. Thank you, Dr. Emilia Norona. Thank you so much. Right. Absolutely right. Let's try another one, shall we? A research project titled Crime Fiction and Literary Fiction by the Demarcation. What would it fall under? Qualitative, fundamental, conceptual, or descriptive research? Maybe some more answers. Qualitative, fundamental, conceptual, or descriptive? Why the demarcation between crime fiction and literary fiction? Absolutely right. Conceptual. Thank you, Vrishali. Third question. A research project titled Indian Nationalism and Indo-Anglian Literature, Critical Re-Evaluation of Writing Race into the English Language, would be classified as what kind of research? Empirical, descriptive, fundamental, or quantitative? How would it be quantitative, Sandra? How would it be empirical? Indian nationalism and Indo-Anglian literature, a critical re-evaluation of writing race into the English language. No. Anyone else? I think we've played enough in our mind now. Isn't it? Won't be imperfect. It would be fundamental. Right? Two more questions before I wind up. Which feature in MS Word in the 2016 version helps you to gather your research? Yes, Prashant, Anadhanti was right. Absolutely right. Thank you, Meenakshi. And so many others have already said it. Thank you. My very last question. If someone is trying to work on a chronological survey of crime fiction, classifying it into various types, in English and in translation, published in India from post-independence times to the present, they would do well to do what from these options? A, B, C, or D? That's my last question. Let's look at the chat box. Expand the scope of their study, broaden their topic, narrow their topic. Yes, thank you, Piyusha, and someone called NT. Thank you, absolutely correct. Narrow their topic of research. Thank you so much. If there are any questions, I'll take them now. I hope this has been useful. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you very much, ma'am, for this very informative and elaborate session and interactive too. May I request the participants, if they have any questions, they can put it in the chat box. We'll take one by one with ma'am's permission.
Absolutely, yes. I have already shared the PPT with the organizers, so if you are interested, you can avail of it. If there are any questions, please feel free to unmute or put your questions on the chat box. If I can, I will be happy to answer them. I hope I have kept time and not overshot.
No, ma'am. Yeah. Participants, please, if you have any questions, please put it in the chat box or raise your hand and ask the questions.
No question.
Ma'am?
Yes, please.
Ma'am, may I ask a question?
Absolutely.
Ma'am, I just wanted to ask one thing. Whenever we choose a writer who is not a contemporary writer, and if the writer is, let's say, from 1920s, or even as a matter of fact, any or the previous centuries, so how do we make it relevant? How can we make that writer's work relevant in our era?
Well, if you have already run a check on the kind of work done on that writer, and if you feel there is a new dimension or a new perspective from which you can, you see, today a lot has been done, for example, in the field of disability studies, in the field of masculinity studies, in the field of trauma studies. But when that writer was writing, this kind of a theoretical perspective was not available. So it is in the marriage of a theoretical perspective with something that was written way back in the first 2 decades of the 20th century that your work is unique. You understand? So you decide, you read up on whatever theoretical perspectives you are interested in. Now, it could be something that has been introduced to you by your professors in class, or a project that you worked on, and therefore maybe you read about panopticism, and suddenly you see in this novel there is an interesting kind of a take on Foucault's notion of panopticism, maybe, and you kind of apply that to that particular novel, or the novels of that particular writer, or gender studies or peer studies. Right? It depends on what field of inquiry or perspective you are applying. That is where the freshness lies.
Okay. Okay, ma'am. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. There is one person who has raised his hand.
Okay.
Can you please unmute and speak? One of the participants.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yes,
Ma'am.
Tanya Bhattacharya.
Yes. Thank you, ma'am. It was a very, very enlightening lecture. I wanted to ask one little thing, that when we take up research in language, and it's a fundamental research, we also have quantitative data to support our evidence, support our theoretization or our readings action. When we do it in literature, what kind of support would you suggest, if not quantitative? If not as a part of fundamental research in literature, what is the actual support?
Generally, what we use is we embed every one of our theoretical applications to that text with textual evidence. So your primary sources have to support your hypothesis. And you have to take a theoretical model and show how you are able to apply it. You understand? So if I take up, let us say, if I take up geocritical geocriticism, and I apply it to, let us say, a particular author's work, let's say Amitabh Ghosh's work. How is his exploration of Burma and India spatially constructed? And I am using, let us say, Tally's theories, or Edward Soya's theories, to Amitabh Ghosh's novels or fiction.
Yes.
And then I prove by citing from the primary sources which I have selected, and show how I envisage these theoretical perspectives in this work. So it has to be constantly integrated and embedded. That is how you are making your case.
Right. But if there is a construct that I would like to propose, how do I do that?
You will have to theorize it first. So you have to do your groundwork and chronologically look at how that area has evolved before you add your own peculiar dimension. So for example, if in geocriticism, you want to add how Indian philosophy perhaps looks at space, or Advaita scholarship looks at space, then you will have to look for secondary sources in this regard, and maybe offer your own theoretical perspective or paradigm, or to create your own term.
Right.
As I gave you the example of eco-precarity, now that is Dr. Pramod Nair's term. And it is cited now by several scholars nationally and internationally.
Yes.
You understand?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Yes. Thank you so much. That was an excellent example, ma'am. Thank you so much.
Anybody else?
Is there any question by the participant? I think.
I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing.
We'll take it as a good thing, ma'am, that the explanation was, I mean, you explained it so well that the concepts are very clear to the participants.
So glad. I'm looking forward now to Dr. Annie John.
Yes, ma'am.
I
Thank
will
you so
just stop sharing screen.
Yes, ma'am.